All right, let's jump right in and talk about the engine room of any modern democracy, elections. I mean, there's so much more than just ticking a box, right? They're the fundamental way your voice, my voice, our voice actually shapes who holds power. So to kick things off, I've got a question for you.
I know, it sounds super dramatic, doesn't it? But this question, it gets right to the very heart of what electoral power is all about. And to really get our heads around it, we're going to rewind the clock and look at a really pivotal moment in Indian politics, the 1987 election in Haryana.
So picture this. Before 1987, the Congress Party had a firm grip on Haryana. It was just the way things were. But then this opposition leader, Chaudhry Devi Lal, comes along and starts something he calls the struggle for justice. And during his campaign, he makes this one single, incredibly powerful promise that just electrified everyone. He said, "Elect me and I will wipe out the loans of every farmer and small business owner." And guess what? People listened. The result was nothing short of a political earthquake. They turned out in massive numbers. He won by a landslide, became the new chief minister, and yeah, he actually kept his promise.
And just take a look at the scale of this thing. I mean, this was not a close call. Devi Lal's party and his allies grabbed a whopping 60 seats. And the ruling Congress Party? They were absolutely decimated, knocked down to just 5 seats. This is what it looks like when the people decide, you know what, it's time for a change. It's a clear, decisive message, all built on that one single promise.
But here's the twist, and this is maybe the most important part of the story. The very same voters who handed him that incredible victory, while just 4 years later, in 1991, they voted him out. And that right there, that's the other side of the coin. It's called accountability. The power that we, the voters, give, well, we can just as easily take it away. This one little story from Haryana pretty much captures the entire essence of why elections are so important.
So, that whole Haryana example really gets you thinking, doesn't it? It leads to a much bigger question. I mean, it's so easy for us to just take elections for granted. But what if? What if we just didn't have them? Let's really dig into the fundamental reasons why this whole system is so essential for, well, a society to even function.
Okay, so at its core, why do we even need elections? Well, a few big reasons. First, it's how we choose the people who are going to make our laws. You can think of it like, how you'd pick a class monitor to speak for everyone. But it's also our only really peaceful way to make big changes and to hold our leaders' feet to the fire. And maybe the deepest reason of all, it's all built on this amazing idea of equality. One person, one vote. That simple idea creates results that, by and large, we all agree to respect. And that acceptance, that's the glue that keeps society from falling apart.
So let's play this out. If we didn't have this system for peaceful choice, for peaceful change, what would we have instead? What does a world without elections actually look like?
Well, let me tell you, it's not a pretty picture. Your rulers would be chosen based on who has the most money, or the most muscle, or maybe just because of who their dad was. And if you got stuck with a terrible leader, tough luck. There'd be no peaceful way to get rid of them. That's just a recipe for endless anger, protests, and chaos. Elections really are society's pressure release valve.
Okay, but here's a super fascinating piece of history for you. Today we think of voting as choosing who we want in power, right? But one of the very first forms of voting was actually all about choosing who to kick out.
Let's zip back to ancient Greece. We're talking around 508 BC. They had this thing that was basically a negative election. Voters wouldn't pick a winner. Instead, they'd write the name of the politician they wanted to get rid of on a broken piece of pottery. These little shards were called ostraca. And get this, that's literally where we get our modern word ostracize. How cool is that? If any politician's name showed up on more than 6,000 of these pottery pieces, boom, they were banished for 10 years. Talk about the ultimate form of accountability.
And all of this brings us to a really critical point. Just because a country holds a vote, that doesn't automatically make it a democracy. I mean, plenty of dictatorships hold so-called elections that are complete shams. So what's the real difference? Well, you can think of it like a democratic rule book, a set of minimum conditions you have to meet to separate the real deal from just political theater.
It's basically a 5-point checklist for what makes an election truly democratic, okay? Number 1, everyone gets an equal vote. 2, you've got to have a real choice. 3, elections need to happen regularly. 4, the person the people actually choose has to win. And 5, the whole process has to be free and fair. So let's break those down with some real-world examples.
Okay, rule number 1. Everybody gets to vote, and every single vote counts the same. One person, one vote, one value. And the most powerful example of this has to be South Africa.
Before 1994, under the horrific system of apartheid, most of the country's citizens were denied the right to vote. After 1994, every single adult citizen gained an equal say at the ballot box. That right there is the absolute cornerstone of a democratic election.
All right, rule 2. What good is having an equal vote if you don't have a real choice? I mean, what's the point if there's only one name on the ballot? In a place like India, you have multiple major parties, like Congress and the BJP, all competing for your vote. That's a genuine choice. Now compare that to China, where basically all the candidates you can choose from belong to the same Communist Party. That's not really a choice, is it? It's more like an endorsement.
And that brings us to Rule 3. That choice can't just be a one-time thing. It has to happen on a regular, predictable schedule. You see this in democracies like the US, with elections every 4 years, or India every 5. That predictability is what gives voters their power. It's what makes accountability real. Now contrast that with a place like Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe, where elections were constantly delayed or messed with, all for the sole purpose of clinging to power.
Okay, rule number 4 is a big one. The person or party that people actually vote for has to win. The results have to be respected. In a place like the UK, a party wins the most seats, and they peacefully form the new government. It's that simple. But then you have the tragic example of Myanmar's 1990 election. Aung San Suu Kyi's party won in a landslide, and the military just refused to hand over power. If the outcome is ignored, then the whole election was just a lie.
And finally, rule number 5. This one kind of holds everything else together. The process itself has to be free and fair. What does that mean? It means voters have to be able to cast their ballot without being scared, without being bribed, and without the whole system being rigged. India has its election commission, which works to enforce these rules and keep things largely fair. That's a whole world away from something like Nigeria's 2007 elections, which were just notorious for rigged votes and even stolen ballot boxes.
So when you put all these rules together, they create the stage for what we call political competition. That constant, messy, noisy fight for your vote. And let's be real, a lot of the time it's ugly. It can be divisive. It can feel like a necessary evil. So let's actually debate that. What are the pros and cons?
Okay, so let's look at the problems first. Political competition for sure can create deep divisions in society. It encourages dirty tricks and just endless blame games. And frankly, it can make a lot of good, decent people want to stay as far away from politics as possible. But, and this is a huge but, it's also absolutely necessary. Why? Because it's what gives us a real choice. It's what forces leaders to actually listen to us because they know we can vote them out. It forces parties to compete and come up with better ideas. So yeah, despite all its ugly flaws, competition is the engine that drives accountability. So, we've talked about the rules, the systems, the pros and the cons, but let's bring this all the way back to where it starts and ends. The power that's in your hands as an individual voter.
And the core principle that makes all of this possible has a fancy name, Universal Adult Franchise. But the idea behind it is actually incredibly simple and really profound. It just means that if you are an adult citizen, you have the right to vote, period. It doesn't matter about your caste, your religion, your gender, or how much money you have in the bank. When you step into that voting booth, your voice is equal to everyone else's.
When you boil it all down, it really comes to this. Elections give people the power to change governments. They let us reward leaders who keep their promises, and just as importantly, they let us remove the ones we no longer support. It's the mechanism that you use to peacefully choose the direction of your country. It is the ultimate cyclical transfer of power, from the people to their leaders, and then eventually right back to the people again.
So there you have it. The rules are pretty simple, but the game itself is incredibly complex. We have the framework, we understand the purpose, but that leaves us with one last big question. It's not about the system anymore, it's about us. What does a healthy democracy demand from us, the voters? The power is there, in our hands. The only real question left is what are we going to do with it?